Good morning, friends. Today, here in this lecture, we are going to continue discussion of the poem from Ruminations by Kiki and Daruwalla. Friends, in the earlier lecture, we had started discussion of the poem from Ruminations by Kiki and Daruwalla. We have discussed that violence, that is the violence in society or domestic violence, death, right, etc., are the major themes in his poetry. And here, this poem from Ruminations is one of the best examples of this kind. Here, the term rumination means in Marathi चिंतन किंवा रवंथ. I shall once again read out the poem. You have the copy of the poem, and therefore you should look at the text of your poem. Once again, I shall read out the poem. Here, the poet says, or the speaker says, or the poetic persona says, I can smell violence in the air like the lash of coming rain, mass hatreds drifting grey across the moon. It hovers, brooding, poised like a cobra, as I go prodding rat holes and sounding caverns looking for a fang that darts, a hood that's raised, and eyes that squirt a raptor hit. I watch my wounds, but they don't turn green. Crossbones, I look for you. Death, I am looking for that bald bone head of yours. But it is in flesh and flesh tissue that my destiny lies. And slowly, corruption takes a hold. Over from the mortuary comes the corpse drapes. Death is so soft. Put it in, put it 10 days in a well and it turns pulpy. Rose water, incense sticks, flowers. The relatives have done their bit. The drift as it comes to us now is aroma, stench, nausea, jostling each other. In the mock veranda, another queues up, her nose sliced off, her lung punctured. It is a three-word story. Infidelity, irritate husband. Man is so pliant, adaptable. Bury him, and he is steadfast as the earth. Burn him, and he will ride the flames. Throw him to the birds, and he will surrender flesh like an ascetic. Rain comes clamoring down, a blind sheet of water. Once the blur lips, colors deepen, the hedge smiles, the leaf loses its coat of dust. The scum spills over from the pool. I look around for a cleansed feeling, the kind you experience walking in a temple after a river bath. I cannot find it. I have misplaced it somewhere in the caverns of my past. In this, so friends, these are the two parts of this poem from Ruminations by Kiki and Daruwalla. Here, in the very beginning part of the poem, the term violence is used by the speaker. The speaker says, I can smell violence in the air. That is, there is violence, and the speaker smells it. That means the violence has not taken place yet, but he has guessed that there could be violence. There could be violence in the society. And therefore, he says, I can smell violence in the air like the lash of coming rain. Mass hatreds drifting grey across the moon. As sometimes we can judge that there could be heavy rain. Similarly, here the poet guesses, he judges that there could be violence in the society. Why? Because two communities are there. That is, the hatred between two communities has taken place. There is hatredness between two communities, and therefore he thinks about that violence. That is, there could be riot in the society. There could be riot in the society. He guesses it on the basis of, or on the base of, the um, hatredness that has arisen between the two communities. And therefore he says, I can smell violence in the air like the lash of coming rain, mass hatreds drifting grey across the moon. Here, this mass hatredness, that is the hatredness between two communities, between two castes, he has uh, guessed, he has guessed that because of this hatredness, there could be violence in the society, and therefore he has to be alert. We have discussed that the speaker, that is the poet, is a, or was a police officer, and therefore he knew all these things very well. He knew all these things very well. He can judge it so easily on the basis of the movements that have that are going on in the society. Yes, and therefore he says, I can smell violence in the air like the lash of coming rain. Lash of coming rain. This image of rain brings home to us the nature of violence. That is, there will be intense violence in the society. It will not be a small violence, it will not be a minor event, or it will not be a minor incident, but there could be extreme violence in the society. And therefore he uses this image, the lash of coming rain, to describe violence. That is, the violence will be very horrible, it will be very dangerous, and therefore he uses that image, the lash of coming rain, to discuss that violence. Mass hatreds. This phrase is very important here. That is, this is the violence between two communities. The hatredness between two communities has taken place, and therefore he uses the term mass hatreds drifting grey across the moon. It hovers brooding, poised like a cobra. Now he compares violence with cobra. Yes, he compares violence with a poisonous cobra. He says it hovers brooding. That violence has not taken place yet, but it is hovering. To hover means गिरट्या घालणे. To hover means गिरट्या घालणे. It is hovering and it is brooding. That is, brooding means thinking seriously. Poised like a cobra. Here, how is this symbol cobra is used for violence? Here, cobra stands for cobra. Cobra is a very poisonous animal, reptile, and therefore, here the speaker uses this term cobra to describe the violence. It brings home to us. It brings to our notice how horrible, how dangerous that violence will be. That is the violence which is going to take place, and therefore he speaks about violence in the that is, he compares violence with cobra, and therefore he says it hovers brooding, poised like a cobra. That is, it is wandering there, thinking seriously, and it is just like a cobra. and it may bite any moment. It may bite at any moment, and therefore he says it hovers brooding, poised like a cobra. As I go prodding rat holes and sounding caverns, looking for a fang that darts. Now he describes his role there. He says, and I go prodding rat holes. I go to search that cobra. I go to search that cobra. Yes. Prodding means या ठिकाणी उकलणे म्हणजे उकरणे या अर्थाने घेऊ आपण. दॅट इज रॅट होल्स. ही हॅज यूज्ड द टर्म रॅट होल्स. रॅट होल्स मीन्स उंदरांचे बीड. उंदरांचे बीड शब्द का वापरला आहे? कारण की जनरली कोबरा वगैरे त्या ठिकाणी घुसलेला असतो ना. बीड असेल किंवा खड्डा असेल की कोबरा त्या ठिकाणी घुसून जातो. आणि कवी या ठिकाणी म्हणतो, स्पीकर या ठिकाणी म्हणतोय की मी तो कोबरा शोधण्यासाठी म्हणजे तो व्हायलन्सचा शोध घेण्यासाठी मी रॅट होल्समध्ये त्या ठिकाणी प्रवेश करतो, मी शोधतो, मी उकरतो ते. In my earlier lecture, I have told you that generally violence takes place in slum area or in the area where most of the middle class families live. That violence hardly takes place the in the area where aristocratic society or aristocratic people where or high class people live. That is, high class people or rich people don't participate in such kind of violence. Then who participates in violence? Most of the people participating in violence are from slum area. They are from poor families. In this way, friends, generally rich people, aristocratic people, educated people don't participate in such kind of violence. Those who are jobless, those who are unemployed, those who are illiterate, those who are poor participate in violence. And therefore here the term rat holes stands for slum area. It stands for slum area, and therefore he says, as I go prodding rat holes and sounding caverns, looking for a fang that darts. That is, he looks for that violence. He looks for the people who are going to create violence in the society. He looks for them. He tries to search them in the slum area, and therefore he says, as I go prodding rat holes and sounding caverns. Cavern means cavern. I have told you the meaning of this term cavern in the earlier lecture. Cavern means guha. Looking for a fang. Fang means फणा किंवा नागाची किंवा सापाची फणा असतं ना. फणा, नाग आणि साप फण काढतो. That is called fang that darts. Yes, that is, he goes in search of the people who are going to create violence in the society, and therefore he says that I go prodding rat holes and sounding caverns, looking for a fang that darts. Dart means, yes, the term dart means बाण, अंकुलीदार बाण वगैरे. दॅट इज या ठिकाणी शब्द वापरला आहे त्या फणांसाठी. म्हणजे द फँग्स दॅट बाईट, साप ज्यावेळेला आपला चावा घेतो त्याच्यासाठी ती इमेज वापरली डार्ट. दॅट इज द स्पीकर being a police of violence who are going to encourage violence or who are going to create violence, he goes there to look for them, to search them, and therefore he uses the term as I go prodding rat holes and sounding caverns, looking for a fang that darts, a hood that sways, a hood that sways. Here this is the description of that cobra. हुडचा खरा अर्थ होतो या ठिकाणी जो मागचा पार्ट आहे त्या कोबऱ्याचा, त्यासाठी हा शब्द वापरलेला आहे हुड. येस, शेपटीचा भाग जो बसतो तो त्यासाठी. आणि स्वे म्हणजे काय? स्वे म्हणजे हालणे. या ठिकाणी कवीला जे म्हणायचे फँग, हुड आणि स्वेप, कोबरा ज्या वेळेला फन काढतो त्यावेळेला तो हलतो. येस, तर दॅट इज द दॅट मुवमेंट ऑफ दॅट कोबरा. शेप हलवतो, फन हलवतो, दॅट मुवमेंट ऑफ दॅट कोबरा, that is described by the speaker here. And therefore he says, I go prodding rat holes and sounding caverns looking for a fang that darts, a wood that sways, and eyes that squirt a reptile hate. And eyes that squirt a reptile hate. The eyes of the cobra. What do? They throw hate outside. Here, this is the description of the people who participate in violence. The two communities who participate in violence, how do they look at each other? This is the description. This sentence describes their movement. That is their eyes, the eyes of the participants in violence. Their eyes, they throw out hate against each other. म्हणजे दोन एकमेकांच्या शत्रू जे काही कम्युनिटीज आहेत, जमाती आहेत, शत्रू जमाती, त्यातले जे काही लोक असतात ते एकमेकांकडे कसे बघतात? रागाने बघतात, द्वेषाने बघतात. अँड देअरफॉर हिअर द स्पीकर हॅज युज्ड दिस फ्रेज, दिस टर्म, a hood that sways and eyes that squirt a reptile hate. स्क्वर्ट म्हणजे चिरकांडी म्हणजे, पण या ठिकाणी काय म्हटलेलं आहे? त्यांच्या नजरेतून जो द्वेष किंवा नजरेतून जे एकमेकांबद्दल तिरस्कार त्या ठिकाणी ते व्यक्त करतात, that process, that movement is described by the speaker here. And eyes that squirt a reptile hate. In this way, friends, here in this very first stanza, we come to know that violence is a major theme of this poem. And there are different kinds of violence. The violence in the community, the violence in the society. Yes, that is called riot, danga, and domestic violence. Here the poet describes the violence between two communities. The violence between two communities, the riot which is going to take place. He compares that violence with cobra. Why the speaker has used the symbol of cobra only? Because cobra is a very poisonous animal. It can bite a man or any animal, and that man can die within a few seconds or few minutes only. And therefore, to bring home to us the horrible nature of that violence, the speaker has used the symbol of cobra, the image of cobra. Yes. And therefore, this image of cobra is very concrete. It clearly describes the nature of that violence. That is, the violence which is going to take place is not so it is so horrible. It is so horrible, and therefore he has used this term cobra to describe it. Again, he uses different types of images to describe that nature of violence. For example, he uses the terms like rat holes, caverns, fang. Fang, it's a very good symbol. Yes. Then hood that sways, eyes that squirt a reptile hate. This image, this is very concrete, very clear image. We come to know how horrible, how dangerous that violence could be. Yes. And therefore, very concrete, very good, concrete and vivid image of cobra is used by the speaker here in the very first stanza of this poem. Now let's see what he speaks about in the poem. What he speaks about violence in the poem. He says, I watch my wounds, but they don't turn green. Cross bones I look for you. Death I am looking for that bald bone head of yours. We have discussed earlier that violence, death, riot, these are the recurring images in the poetry by Daruwalla. Here we have the example of this poem. He says, I watch my wounds. The poet himself, the speaker himself is wounded. And therefore he says, I watch my wounds, but they don't turn green. But they don't become green. That means he himself is wounded. Perhaps it could be wound on mind, wound on heart. It could not be wound on body. Perhaps it could not be physical violence, but it could be mental violence. And therefore, it has made a very dangerous effect on his mind. And therefore, the poet here says, I watch my wounds, but they don't turn green. Cross bones I look for you. Cross bones, that is, there are some injuries that have taken place in the violence. And he says, I look for the cross bones. Death, I am looking for the bald bone head of yours. There could be a man who has been killed in that violence. That is balded person. And therefore he says, Death, I am looking for that bald bone head of yours. But it is in flesh and flesh tissue that my destiny lies. The speaker here seriously tells us that his destiny lies in flesh and flesh tissues. That is, he has to be in the violence for days and nights. He has to face such kinds of incidents every time. And therefore he says here, but it is in flesh and flesh tissue that my destiny lies. And slowly corruption takes a hold. What happens after violence? Only corruption. That is, people from both the sides come, they settle the matter. Sometimes generally such violence takes place because of political cause. There are politicians behind such violence. And we know that politics without corruption is almost impossible. Even some officers, some bureaucrats, they do corruption. And therefore here the speaker says that